I'm Jill Pitkeathley and I've been a member of the House of Lords since 1997. I can tell you exactly what made me a campaigner, and I would only be about 8 years old. And my grandmother told me the story of when she was a young widow after the First World War. My mother and her brother were sick with whooping cough, a killer disease in those days. She called the doctor, she was so worried about them. The doctor came to the door of her little house, saw the children on the sofa and said, "Have you my fee?" My grandmother said no, she didn't have the fee until her widow's pension came the next day, when she would bring it straight round to the surgery, and the doctor turned and walked away. I remember very clearly my reaction then, and it's still my reaction now.
I'm Emily Holtzhausen. I'm Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Carers UK, and my relation to Baroness Pitkeathley is currently, Lady Pitkeathley is our Vice President of Carers UK and has been for very many years.
Carers UK is my life's work, I suppose. If on my tombstone it says she cared for the carers, that will be fine. I actually only applied for the job because it happened to be based at Paddington and I was living in Reading at the time. But within 2 days, I was completely hooked on the distress that these people had who were looking after elderly, disabled, frail people at home, virtually unrecognised. And I think we have to remember that then, in the mid-80s, the word carer was not known. In fact, it was often misspelt as career.
Jill was absolutely extraordinary and will go down in history as one of the great movement makers. She was appointed just before the two organisations merged in 1988 and brought two very different, very culturally different organisations together to make the charity that we see today. She presided over a time as well when there was an extraordinary change. So a change from an NHS and social welfare system that really concentrated on long-stay institutions and keeping people in the NHS and in residential units to the system of community care that we had. And she's unusually, the government picked her out as an advisor to the Griffith report that heralded that, where care was being transferred into the community, and her role really was to highlight the impact on families, which she did exceptionally well.
So there was a great deal to be done in terms of getting these people, and we now know there are 6.5 million of them, recognised and supported in whatever way we could bring about.
We have continued to do that. So we've continued to build on the rights that she first secured. She also unusually started a debate at a time when people weren't willing to talk about it, about juggling work and care. It was one of those, oh, you can't talk about that, that's really difficult for people. But she was determined to talk about it, about people having ordinary lives. And that we've continued to take on as a theme, which now we have rights in legislation, right to request flexible working, right to unpaid time off, and that campaign continues until we secure a right to paid leave.
I was always interested in politics. I grew up without politics in the Channel Islands, but from the time of being a student and certainly being a social worker, I was interested in politics. But of course, all the time that I led a charity, one had to be seen to be completely politically neutral. And so I didn't take an active part in politics in those days. Being selected as a peer was a complete bolt out of the blue for me. Some people expect it. I believe some people even try to negotiate for it. But to me, it was a complete and utter surprise to get a phone call from the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, to come straight to the point, "I want to put you on my list of working peers." I was pretty well struck dumb, and if my daughter hadn't been with me at the time, mouthing to me to say yes, I would have not known what to say at all. So it was a complete surprise to me.
We were absolutely delighted when Jill told us that she would be joining the House of Lords. We were really, really ecstatic, both for her as a person and the recognition for caring issues. She was the first set of peers that were appointed by Tony Blair as Prime Minister, and that was incredibly exciting and of value. It was a juggle for Jill to manage being Chief Exec of Carers UK and her duties in the House of Lords, particularly because Labour had so few peers. And at times when challenging discussions came up as well, she would quite often want to be part of things.
Well, I think the House of Lords fulfills a very important function, which is as a revising and advising chamber. We ask the government to think again. Have you got this piece of legislation right? Have you really considered all the options? And what happens now is that a lot of legislation is guillotined in the House of Commons, so that lots of legislation comes here and parts of it haven't even been looked at, never mind debated.
Based on local needs and priorities, which is why the funding made available to them is not ring-fenced for a specific purpose.
So the Noble Earl is telling the House that £10 million, almost a quarter of the money that his department allocated for Local Health Watch, has disappeared on its way through the Department of Communities and Local Government, through to local authorities, and not reached Local Health Watch.
Social care is at a tipping point. It's in a mess, to be blunt. And we have to remember that the current system of social care was set up in 1948. In 1948, men died when they were 66 on average, a year after retiring, and women died at about the age of 67, 68. Nowadays, men live till 79, women well into their 80s. So in those days, you didn't need the kind of care that we now need. And as a consequence, it didn't matter that while healthcare was free, social care was always means tested and you had to pay for it. Most people don't understand that. It is time for a good public debate about how we fund and arrange social care, and I shall keep on trying to campaign for that.